In this video, we're going to go about modeling out the responses that we can potentially get from Ktor, from the network in the application. So let's first start by just quickly going over the two possible responses that we can have. So again, opening up our friend Postman, you've already seen the get request where we get a specific, recipe ID. So that's this one right here. But then what about the search request? So for a search request, this is the URL. It's almost exactly the same, except it has the keyword search, and then you have a couple parameters. So you have like a pagination system, so you can get page number 1, 2, 3, whatever for any particular query, and you can put whatever you want to search here. Like kale seems to be always the example I use. So if I search that, looks like we get 61 total recipes, and it gives you a list of results. So this response is actually slightly different than the get request for an individual recipe. You can see here we have an individual JSON object that is returned for that particular recipe. And then for this one, we actually have a JSON object with a couple parameters. One parameter is count, next, previous, and then we have a parameter called results, which is actually a list of JSON objects. So we need to build the responses for these requests. So we'll start by building the networking model. So here's our our domain model that we built in the previous video. Now we're going to build a networking version of that. So going into data source, and let's go into network here and create a new package inside of network and call this model. And inside of model, we're going to create a new Kotlin file and call this one recipe DTO for recipe data transfer objects. That is kind of just like that's the naming convention that I like to use for naming network objects these days. And you're going to see a different convention when we name the caching objects. So just to kind of, just to remind you, we have our core business model, recipe, then we have recipe DTO, which refers to the networking version of that. So the first thing here is we want to annotate this with serializable. So we're using that Kotlin X serialization library. And I'll just remind you of where we have that kind of added to our build.gradle. So if we go to the shared build.gradle, here's where we have that plugin to get that Kotlin serialization dependency. So that makes this available to us. Now I'm going to use @serialized name or @serial name. And here's where we want to specify the field name for the field name in the response. So if we go to Postman here, that's going to be like here. So here, all of these values here, so like primary key, title, publisher, those are the serial names that we want to pass to this annotation. Very similar to retrofit. I'm going to write var primary key is integer. And now I want to basically just copy this and do this, several more times for every field that is available in that response. So I'll copy it one more time. Next one's going to be the title, and just call this a title. And this one will be a string. Copy that one more time. And the next one will be the publisher. So call this publisher. And again, this one will be a string. I'm going to copy the string one because that's probably the most common entry. So copy the string one. Next will be the featured image. Notice here, this is featured underscore image because I'm matching exactly what these keys in this JSON object are. So featured image, but then here, this will be featured image in the like Java, I guess, notation. Next will be the rating, and this one's going to be an integer. Oops, rating and integer. Next here will be the source URL. So source URL, and that one's a string. Paste in another one. This one's going to be the ingredients list. So we'll call it ingredients. That's the key here is ingredients. So just writing that out. And call this ingredients, and this one is going to be a list of strings, and by default we'll set it equal to an empty list if there happens to be no ingredients, but I'm pretty sure that everything in the API does include ingredients. And then last but not least, we're going to do the two dates. So we have long date added, and this one we'll just call it long date added, and this value will be a long coming from the server. Now copy it one last time, paste it down below. This is going to be long date updated, and then just change this text to updated. Those are all of our fields for our recipe DTO. So that's how we would model the GET request, this one right here, because remember, we're just getting a single JSON object from the API. So what about this request though? Here, this one's different, right? Like we have a JSON object with a bunch of fields, and then inside that JSON object is a list. So how are we going to build that response? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another new model inside of this networking kind of package here. So create a new Kotlin file and call this one recipe search response. And this one will also be a data class. So again, annotate this with serializable. And now let's add those fields. So I can paste in the thing that I had copied from the previous one. So the first one here is going to be the count. This is technically not something that we're going to use, but I just added it just to kind of give you an example. Because if we take a look at the response here, we have a bunch of fields, count, next, previous, results. I'm going to show you just how to get this, even though we're not going to use it. We're also not going to be using next and previous, because if you want to go to the next page of results, you just increment the page number and then boom, there's the next page of results. All right, so let's paste this in one more time and do results, because that was the keyword, and call this results. And this is going to be a list of recipe DTO. So recipe DTO. That's it. Those are our two kind of network serialization classes that we need to parse the data coming in from the network. So now that we have these two kind of different models, like we have the recipe DTO for the networking, we have the recipe model for our core kind of business model, we need a way to be able to map back and forth to and from the recipe model. Because remember, in the UI, the only thing that the UI should ever know exists is the recipe model, not the recipe DTO. So it's really important, because then when you write your unit tests, you only ever have to test the recipe model itself. The recipe DTO is just strictly used for, getting that data, and then it's going to be mapped over to a recipe, because that's kind of the core business model of the application. So we need special mapper classes to be able to do those conversions, and that's what we're going to work on in the next video.